Good evening. I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. Thank you for joining us this evening. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, a very special thank you. I am especially happy to welcome you because CWS is about having conversations with people about their journeys and how are they using their gifts and talents to help others and how are they making positive contribution to humanity. While I'm saying that though, I can't help but reflect on this space that the world is in today. A great leader, a humanitarian, a politician, a man of great stature, Nelson Mandela, passed. And so while we mourn, many of us, I'm sure, are in reflection, in contemplation. I especially ask our leaders, our politicians around the world, to pay special attention to not only his works, not only what he stood for, but take time to be still with yourselves and ask how much of what this man represented do I stand for? How much of what he stood for can I actually embrace? The question is not if you can embrace it. The question is, why don't you? There are so many ills around the world, so many women and children suffering, so many injustices, so many social issues that can be fixed if we but had the will. I remember Nelson Mandela as a child growing up in Guyana. And the reason why I remember this struggle so much is because I was always struggling with pronouncing the word apartheid. Sometimes I say apartheid and I get pulled up. Sometimes I say apartheid, I get pulled up, and I said, you know what, hell with it, it's apartheid. It didn't really matter as long as I realized what it was, what we were fighting for. And it made an impression on me as a child that here is a man who's incarcerated for what he believed in. And what did he believe in? Not getting more for himself, not fighting for more land or for more rights or for more goods and services, but fighting for his people. And here he is spending his time in jail. And then he was released. And that was another turning point in my life. I asked myself then, what is he going to do? I have to be honest with you. At the time I was thinking, oh my gosh, the revenge, the vengeance, because this man has suffered so much. The freedom fighters and the people of South Africa suffered so much. There must be a bloodbath. And then something remarkable happened. Something surreal happened. Reconciliation. Sitting down with his enemies and saying, let us reconcile. Not for him. And I know he could not have not had animosity or anger. But by the time he sat down with his enemies, he had overcome that. And I have to say, it is not easy to overcome anger. It is not easy to overcome resentment, especially when you have been wronged. Especially when you've been made to suffer. And not only you, your family. And for Nelson Mandela to have done such a remarkable thing, to show such grace in a time when there are many who was crying out for blood, for vengeance, he said no. He said no. And I remember that. And I remarked at it. And then he did something else, another remarkable thing. In the seat of power, he gave it up. He handed over the reins to someone else to run the country. Wow. I will never forget that. And so I have to say that tonight, while we are in mourning and in reflection, I have to say we will miss you, Nelson Mandela. On Thursday, CWS is going to pay a tribute to this man. And I sincerely hope that I can stand up to this task. We are going to have two guests from South Africa to talk about his legacy, what it means, what what it meant and all of these things. And I just hope that I'll be able to do this show justice. But Nelson Mandela, I say thank you. Thank you for all that you've given this world. Thank you for all that you've given young men like myself. Thank you for what you have left for not only the next generation, but future generations. Thank you so much. Um, I'll take a break, and when we return, I'll introduce you to our guest tonight, Lourdeth Ferguson. We are back. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. The lovely lady next to me is my guest for the evening, Lourdeth Ferguson. Lourdeth, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Selwyn, and good night, everyone.
Um, I want to start with your bio. It says Lourdeth Ferguson was born in Georgetown, Guyana on 28th of September. A committed Christian, Lourdeth is also a professional international civil servant who believes in the goals of the United Nations, currently employed with the United Nations Population Fund. Lourdeth is passionate about making life better for women and children across our world, which coincides with the mandate of that organization. Lourdeth has contributed to the lives of many teenagers in Guyana at the Olga Burns Youth Center, which is the youth arm of the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association. As a model and mentor, her main focus was on teaching youth the importance of taking care of their bodies and fostering reproductive health while embracing the arts through fashion and drama. Here in the US, Lourdeth exhibits her passion by visiting schools on Career Day to speak to children about the work of the United Nations and on several aspects UNFPA's work. Lourdeth also travels across India and to Cambodia to contribute to the well-being of women and children there through mission activities led by Restoration Temple Assembly of God Church in Brooklyn. In addition to volunteering with service organizations such as Rotary International, Lourdeth has served as charter member and sergeant at arms 2004-06 for the World Voices Toastmasters Club of the United Nations and vice president 05-06 and president 07-08 of the United Nations Staff Recreation Council Travel Club. With strong disposition to serve and mentor, she presently heads the GP support group at the United Nations. She has attained her Bachelor of Social Science degree in Sociology in '94 from the University of Guyana, a Master of Social Science degree in Social Science 2007, with a concentration in international organizations from the Long Island University in New York. Lourdeth, thank you again for coming. Um, I know in my introduction I spoke about Nelson Mandela, but I have to ask you this question. As we mourn, perhaps the greatest statesman the world has ever seen, a gracious man of vision and wisdom, how did the news of his death affect you?
It felt as if it was a family member, to be quite honest. I got the news, I was in the office, and I was shocked. Even though, I knew that the time was coming, I think that I was very shocked when I heard the news, and I went over to my colleagues and I told them what had happened. And we were, visibly saddened by the news of his passing. Um, he was a great man indeed, and he taught us a lot.
Um, as a black woman, if you could have asked him one question, what would that be?
I think the question I would ask him, maybe teach us, or maybe I would have asked him to teach us how to forgive,
Mm.
because for me that was one of the greatest things that he did in his lifetime.
What do you remember about apartheid as a teenager?
I remember that it was a terrible thing. I
Hmm.
remember that it was, he brought visibility to South Africa's situation for me, and I knew it was a terrible thing that was going on in South Africa. I had no idea how it would have been resolved,
Hmm.
but at that time, but he brought visibility to it, to the situation, to us as teenagers.
You were born in Guyana,
Yes,
and spent some, grew up there.
born
What
and bred.
born and what are your fondest memories of Guyana, of growing up in Guyana?
My fondest memories, well, there are a lot,
Hmm.
but I think the time I spent in the country area with my family in the Mycone Perseverance. My grandmother would take me there, and I had the fruit trees and the just the wild abandon of being around your family and running around and just being free. And it's something that I wish my children could experience living here in the U.S. I mean, that was one of the fondest memories I have as a child.
And this is coming high school.
High school. Oh, high school. Um, I have several warm memories of high school, but I think the most important thing for me is the friendships that I made during those years.
Uh-huh.
It's a beautiful thing, and some of those friends I'm still in contact with until today. Um, and we had so many good times together, in Lamha Gardens at the Meredith's residence, those parties and fun times just hanging out with my friends. And in Meadowbrook Gardens with my friends like Wayne Farley and Jesse Ennis and Fabian Hay. All we had really really good times in those days.
That is true. It
Yeah,
was a safe time,
absolutely.
very safe time.
Yeah.
Um, why is it so important to encourage young people, but especially young women and girls, to believe in themselves and to reach beyond the stars?
I think it's really important because most of our young people today come from homes that um, do not validate that kind of action.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, it is critical for those of us who feel that call to let young people, particularly girls, know how important they are to society, how important they are. Because in their homes they may not hear this,
Hmm.
but if we can get them in the schools, in the social environments, that they may find themselves, if we can tell them and show them how important they are, that they are gifts from God, I feel that it will change the way that they view themselves and what they can be in the future.
I like that. Gifts from God. How did your parents influence you?
Well, I came from, I wouldn't say a single parent home, but I mean, I came from a single parent home, but yet it wasn't a single parent home. I had my mother
Hmm.
and I had my grandmother.
Hmm.
So, in essence, I had two strong women who raised me and to whom I'm extremely grateful for all that they have put into my life. Um, my grandmother was an educator,
Hmm.
and so was my mother for a short time. And they were very instrumental in the way I was raised and the way I think about myself and the way that I do things today, because their strength
Hmm.
influenced me greatly. They didn't let the fact that there wasn't a man in the home keep them back from providing, from guiding, from making sure that we had the best education. So I think the fact that they were always there for me was, was amazing, and it's very important to me, so
Is that where you draw some of your strength from in your quiet moments?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, let's go there a bit. Strong women.
Hmm.
You had two, stellar women in your home, your mom and your grandmother, and there was a time in Guyana when we were exposed to very strong women, right? I remember Shirley Field Ridley, Viola Barnum, Janet Jagan, Carmen Jarvis, my headmistress, and the list goes on and on. Um, in your current capacity, in your current work, dealing with women and trying to empower women, so to speak, and to help them to recognize the strength and the gift that's within them, and that they are gifts. Um, how how did these some of the strong women that you were exposed to as a child or a teenager growing up in Guyana, how do they still impact you today when you're dealing with women?
Well, they totally do. I can think of particularly one woman
Mhm.
whose life, apart from my mother and my grandmother, whose life impacted me significantly. And she's the late Elaine Merriman.
Mhm.
And she had me under her wing from a young girl. And Auntie Elaine, as I fondly remember her, she was a philanthropist.
Mhm.
She was a model in her own right,
Mhm.
and I was an aspiring model myself. And she always made sure that she took me to wherever she was going, her social events, fashion shows. She exposed me in that arena as much as as was possible at the time. My mother totally trusted her with me. And one of the things that she did that I find myself doing now is using the fact that she loved fashion, she loved clothes, and she used that. She had in her backyard, we used to have these fashion shows and tea parties. And Aunt Elaine would raise funds for her church by having us model and at the tea parties. And it was an annual event. It was beautiful, always well done.
Mhm.
And so, and I find myself today using the same concept
Mhm.
to have my friends come over and raise funds for whatever it is I'm doing at the time, because I'm always doing something.
The Olga Born Youth Center.
Yes.
You worked with teenagers there. Tell us about some of the things you did with them.
Well, actually, my exposure to the youths there was quite, I wouldn't say by accident, but incidental.
Mhm.
I was actually at the Red Cross had an annual fashion show in those days. I don't know if they still have it. And the executive director for the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, Mrs. Romeo, she came to the dressing room and she said, "I'd like to speak with you." And that's after I participated in the fashion show. And she said, "I'd like to speak with you." And so I spoke with her. She asked me if I can come into her office the following week, and I said yes. And I went to see her. And she said, "I would like you to be a mentor for these girls." She told me I had never heard about this Olga Byrne Youth Center before, but she told me what it is they were doing and what it is that she felt that I could help her with. And that's how it started. And I just started working with the girls, and most of them were had gone to some secondary school, but they left before completing. And so essentially, what I did with them was, I talked to them. I mean, kind of like informal workshops about body hygiene. We did. We talked about fashion. Lots of them were, they were very happy that someone like me could take time out to sit and talk with them. We talked about, boys, sexual activity. We were very open about in our discussions, and whatever way I could have helped them, I did. But I think one of the things that we did that was significant was a fundraising fashion show, and there we go again, me and these fashion shows. There was a fund. I helped. We were raising funds, and so I decided that it would be a good thing to have a fashion show, and that's what we did, and it was very well received, and I think some of the girls, I've at least two of them. I'm still, once I go back to Guyana, I still see them, check them out, see how they're doing, But yeah, it was a good experience.
Um, who was the person who most influenced you, and how?
The person who most influenced me and how?
Or just tell us who.
Well, I would say my mother.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that she's had the greatest influence on me, really and truly, because she is such a strong woman. Um, she's done a lot for us, and she's made sure that we had a very good education. I come from a family of three. I'm the eldest, and I have a younger brother and sister. And looking back, we didn't do too badly coming from the environment that we did. And I work, as you said, I work with the United Nations. My brother, who is my immediate junior, he is in California. He works with a marketing company, and he has a very good job. And my younger sister is an attorney. She's back home in Guyana.
Congratulations to your mom.
Yes.
And
Thank
when
you.
when you mention when you think of a strong woman, let's take your mom as an example. What are certain attributes that reflect strength in a woman to you?
For me, the fact that she didn't bow over and die when my parents divorced. The fact that she didn't neglect her children. Those are the fact that she made sure she did without so that we could have an education. My mother never went on a vacation, and we didn't know about those things when we were younger. And so for me, those are things that we recognize in her that tell us that she was a tower, indeed a tower of strength to our family. And the fact that she continues to give to all of her children, even until now. It's amazing, and the fact that she does not neglect to show her love to us.
Can you tell us a bit about what you do at the United Nations?
Oh, sure. What do I do at the United Nations? Well, right now I am working with the United Nations Population Fund, and that is the agency in the United Nations that's responsible for population issues as well as sexual and reproductive health issues, meaning we make sure that women and also men have the highest quality of sexual health care, meaning in terms of we make sure we provide contraceptions to the program country in the program countries in which we work, and we also make sure that women have screening for their various cancers and all these different things. Once we have the funding, and once we have the government of the particular country is willing to work with us, we establish programs in those countries. But one of the main things that we also do is make sure that we assist countries in terms of their censuses, population issues and counting, and making sure that within the countries that are, for example, like Myanmar, they're going through their census year, and so we make sure that we provide them with the technical support that they would need for those.
How does that work? How does I guess this is a two-part question. How does a country qualify, and how does UNFPA knows that a country needs this? How does that come together?
Well, they work with together with governments. These issues at the government level, they would. Particularly within program countries, there are some countries that the UN works with all the time, and once the government expresses a need, once the government expresses a need to the UN, then the agency concerned would implement a program or develop a program, and that's where I come in actually, because I work with the executive board for UNFPA, and the responsibility of the board is to adopt country programs. So when those country program documents are prepared and they have to be submitted to the executive board for approval, they would come to me, and I am responsible for editing, and those country program documents come from the country themselves. They work on it in conjunction with our offices there, and it comes to me because it has to come to headquarters for approval. We have 3 board sessions every year, and one of those sessions is when we would have those documents adopted. They have to be approved, and once they're, I edit them, and then it's submitted to the UN. The UN proper, meaning the UN Secretariat. That's where the documents control for all the UN agencies. And they do the translations and so on, and they make sure that those documents are ready for it when the board session comes up. So once the board session comes up, the documents are approved. If the board has any questions, there are representatives from the countries and from UNFPA to answer any questions they may have. And then it's approved, and then only then can the actual work in terms of providing, finding the resources, getting the resources, and all the other little things, making sure that they're in place, would come on board. But the document is a critical thing, because that's a political part of it. Yeah.
You mentioned funding. Who funds these initiatives? Are they developed countries? I mean, where do you get funding from?
Yeah, actually, we have the developed countries who do mostly the funding, like Germany. We have, and sometimes the funding is earmarked for specific projects. So let's say, for example, maternal health, or for a particular census to provide technical direction for a census country, or for example, let's say, for example, the Philippines, they just had a typhoon, and so countries may have earmarked funding for those particular activities. To provide help for the typhoon, or to provide assistance in a particular census, technical assistance. They pay, or for example, to pay for doctors to go to do C-sections in Haiti, for example, after they had that devastating earthquake some time back, let's say. So they may have earmark fundings, and then sometimes there are two types of fundings: earmark fundings for specific projects or programs, and then there's also general funding that like for example, we can actually take it to do something specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
From your point of view, or your vantage point, I should say, um, just 2 points. What would have been the state of some of these developing countries had there not been a UNFPA?
I think had there not been UNFPA, I think one, the focus would not have been on these issues. I mean, even now we have the struggle where some donors or some people think that reproductive health is not a main focus. It's not important. But we beg to differ because, let's say, for example, the most recent, let's go back to the Philippines. If once there has been a natural, some kind of disaster, once there's conflict, people are living in tents. Women do not stop having babies if when there's a natural disaster. As a matter of fact, I think studies have shown that they're more likely to be engaging in sexual behavior, and then babies come. In those conditions, there are no hospitals. The hospitals have been destroyed. How it is then that how are these women going to deliver these children? And so that's where we come in. UNFPA goes into these areas, make sure that the women have what we call dignity kits, to make sure that they deliver their babies safely. Make sure if they have to have C-sections, we need to have doctors. We need to have. I recall one of the videos in Haiti where they had to put tables, just regular tables, the folding tables, and women were delivering babies on those. Because it's a crisis situation. So it's not the ideal situation. But what we have to do is to make sure that it's done in a way that people do not get infected and, to have a crisis on top of a crisis. The other issue that we have, that we find is high incidences of domestic violence in those in conflict situations, in humanitarian disaster situations. There are high instances of domestic violence because people's emotions are ragged. So these are also issues that we come in to circumvent. So,
What was the decision or the choice to work with women and girls and young girls natural for you? Was that a natural progression? Is this how did this happen for you?
I think it's a natural progression. It just fell into place. I mean, I was working before. Like I told you, I was working with the Olga Byrne Youth Center. It was just like a natural progression for me to do that, and I felt comfortable. I felt very happy doing it, and I was well received too, so that helped, and then I end up here at the UN, and the mandate for the organization focuses also on women and girls, and for me in my life nothing happens by accident, and so I honestly feel that that is preordained. And it so happens also in my church life, if you want to call it that. I'm also working with Women and Girls internationally. So it's for me, it's all around me, so I can't run from it. So I may as well make the best of it and contribute to their lives the best way I could.
I had this question, and I think you've answered it just now. How do you believe UNFPA impact the lives of women and young girls around the world? You've answered that. So I'm going to ask you this one. What is most rewarding to you when you visit schools on career day to speak to kids about the work of the UN and UNFPAs?
For me, what is most rewarding is the fact it's the interest. I think a lot of children that in the schools that I have visited, they did not know much about the UN. They did not know. Some of them did not know anything about the UN. And for me to actually tell them that there's an organization that you can go to work for, it was so enlightening for them. And the fact that there are so many professions within the UN sphere that one can become engaged in, it was so mind-boggling for them, and they were really, oh, yeah, you can be a doctor and still work for the UN. You can be a lawyer and work for the UN. You can be a translator. You can be an English major. So, for all their various interests, subject area interests, they can work for the UN, and that was very rewarding for me.
Let me just go to the chat room for a second. Orson said, first time checking in, can't wait to join the conversation. Jim asked, what do you enjoy most about working with young women?
Well, for me, I enjoy the fact that I can impart something, maybe some part of my life into someone else.
Love that.
That for me is most rewarding.
I love that. And Kim asked, are there always funding available?
Well, I suppose that was for the UN. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, there is always funding available, but sometimes not as much as we would like. Because, with the Wall Street fallout, it impacted, the impact was global. And we found that a lot of countries that were supporting our programs have not been supporting as much, Mm-hmm. So that's an issue that we face,
Well, let's take a quick break.
Said, suffer the little children to come unto me. Every day, more than 30,000 children around the world die of preventable diseases. More than 300,000 children are being used in war as child soldiers. Lord have mercy. A child should be loved. A child should be held. A child should be clean. A child shouldn't smell. A child shouldn't go to bed hungry at night. A child should be taught wrong from right. A child should learn to say thanks and please. A child shouldn't suffer from preventable disease. A child is
We are back with the lovely Lourdeth Ferguson. Lourdeth, what are some of the UNFPA's initiatives that really resonate with you?
For me, I think the fact that we're so ready, particularly with the humanitarian aspect of our work, and I think we have over the years, particularly over the time that I have been there, made efforts to make sure that we're ready for these situations. Mm-hmm. We have this surge initiative that has been recently put in place. And so when this Philippines disaster came, teams were on the ground within 24 hours. So to make sure that, our mandate was being fulfilled and that the women and girls and who were underground were actually being taken care of.
And how does this organization UNFPA find out about some of the social challenges in some of these countries?
Well, Through NGOs, our partnerships with NGOs are key to our operations in all the aspects of our work. We use NGOs a lot. We have several NGOs that we work with and who provide input to our programs and our planning for these programs. So NGOs, definitely.
And you've traveled to places like India and Cambodia. What does each of these cultures or countries teach you?
That we are all one.
I like that. I like that. Growing up in Guyana, multi-ethnic society with a large East Indian population. What stood out to you when you visited India for the first time?
How similar we all are. It was amazing. To some parts of India, I felt as if I was in Guyana, and then some parts, it's. I don't think there's anything that can be compared to the poverty that I was exposed to there. But for me, I was the way some of the food. Um, it's just amazing how, even though many years have passed, how similar the preparation is.
What surprised you the most about India?
I think the poverty.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, coming from Guyana, I felt that, we were a underdeveloped country, and I felt that, I mean, we must have had the worst because, you hear, just next to Guyana is Haiti, and, you think that, oh, well, we're way down under. But when I went to India, I was so shocked when I saw the conditions under which so many people lived. So that was indeed shocking for me.
And this, I'm curious about this. What did you learn about yourself working with the young girls and women in India?
Well, I think I learned compassion. I learned that these young women have needs just like me, and it propelled me to find creative ways to, or to start thinking of ways in which I could be of help to them. And I'm not talking about financially. I'm talking about just being there to listen to their concerns and talking to them. Some of them want to, they have goals and aspirations, and it was just really enlightening to engage them and to see that, even though they're in dire poverty, some of them, they still have dreams. So that was one of the things that.
What is one way you promote positive self-esteem in young women?
I tell them that one, you are a gift from God. You are special, and I think that's something that every young woman needs to hear and needs to hear it consistently. And unfortunately, not many of them hear it in their homes, whether it be cultural, or not. But for some reason, they don't hear it. They don't think that they can be beautiful. They don't think that they are, they figure some homes, you just need to go to school. In some places, the girls don't go to school. It's not important for the girls to go to school, and they focus on the boys only. And that is not right.
I have a two-part question. One is, having worked with women or young girls in Guyana, not in this particular capacity, but it really shouldn't matter. And having worked with them in India and places like Cambodia and so on, what is the common thread you find among women in all three cultures?
They want to be somebody.
They want to be somebody.
They
I like that.
really want to be somebody.
And here's the other part. How important is the connection, contact, and an interaction between older women and younger girls?
It's very important. For me, one of the things that I try to, there is a gap. There's a gap in the thinking, the way how they think, in some cases. But I think the challenge remains to bridge that gap, because the older women should be the one teaching the younger women
Right.
how it is that they ought to conduct themselves. But sometimes the older women don't know. So this last trip, when I was in Cambodia, and I had the opportunity to speak to, the group was mixed. There were some older women, not many, but there were some younger women also, and some young girls, between 17, 18, 15, teenagers. And you can see that when I'm talking to the younger girls, that the women are like enlightened also, because it's a society where the women are very demure, and they're not encouraged to be very outspoken. But there's a young core of young women, and that we have been working with and encouraging, and it's just, you can see the pleasant surprise on the look on the faces of the older women, which is encouraging.
Well, what is your most memorable experience in Cambodia?
The most memorable experience. Well, apart from working, with the group that I went with, for me, the most memorable would be my visit to the killing fields. It was a very sad experience to learn about what happened during the genocide, and to see firsthand the skulls of all the people who were executed, and to think that this level of injustice could be done. Man to man, I think it was Bob Marley who said,
Yeah.
man to man is so unjust.
Brother Bob, yes.
Yeah. And
Wow.
I stood there and I looked at all the skulls, and this was only at one of the places where the executions took place. And for me, that was very, very sad, but it reminded me how important conscience is in a man, and how important a sense of who God is, and that there's some restraining factor that we need to have in our lives, because for someone to just order this kind of execution was unbelievable.
Do you ever get discouraged in what you're doing?
No, I don't. I don't, because I feel that if there's one person, there must be one person whose life mine would affect.
And what experience with young girls have influenced you the most?
Well, I recall one young woman who I should say I was instrumental in getting her a job at a certain establishment in Guyana, and I saw her subsequently, and she told me now that she has her own establishment.
Wow.
And for me, when I did it, it was just, you know, it wasn't, and I didn't think anything of it. But to think that it had such a long term, such a lasting impact on her life, on her livelihood, and the woman that she has become, 10 years, 20 years down the line, it's just amazing.
Is there anything in particular for both your job at the UN and with your church that you would like to draw people attention to?
Well, in terms of something in particular, just my voice to say that women and girls deserve attention. They deserve attention, they deserve opportunities, they deserve to be heard, and their needs need to be addressed.
Looking back on your journey, what would you do differently?
I think about that sometimes.
Hmm.
I would not do anything differently. When I think of the journey of my life, I would not do anything differently. My mistakes, I have learned from them.
Hmm.
They were instrumental in the woman that I have become today. So I would not do anything differently. I thank God for His grace and His provision, and I don't think I would do anything differently.
Can you tell us one particular challenge you have overcome and that you're proud of?
Well, starting over my life,
Mm.
pretty much, because I was living in Guyana, and 14 years ago I came to the United States. I said, in an effort to, I had a vision, and I had overcome my teenage folly, and I had a vision for my life. I had two young children, and I had God on my side, and I decided that, listen, we're going to do this together. And I came to the United States, and I started my life over. I went to school. I got a job. I raised my children. And I think, and now I have a wonderful husband. In my life, I think I'm on my way to achieving my life's purpose, which is to do as God intended for me to do, to work with His people and to affirm them and to bring them closer to Him. And for me, I can't ask for anything more.
That's a good note to take a break. We are back. Lourdeth, I just want to go into the chat room for a second. Kim asked, what is the greatest compliment a young girl ever gave you in India or Cambodia?
Well, I think generally they're very grateful for my time, but I think for most of them it's the first time they've seen a woman of color.
Really?
Yes, and I think they find the way I look very exotic. I mean, it's just I'm sorry to have to say this. I'm usually a very modest person, but it's just that for me that was that was kind of startling to see how especially like the first day when they see it's a black person. It's and also that in India it's the same thing. It's in the areas that we go to, it's very remote, so they don't see people like myself.
And Carol asked, what is the worst thing ever happened to you on one of your trips?
Well, Since Carl asked, the worst thing that happened was when we missed our flight to go to an area called Bhopal
Where is this?
in India.
Yeah.
We missed the connection. We're coming from a place called Surat, and we missed the connection, and we had to go by road. It's about 20 hours by road.
How many hours?
20. It was about 20 hours. And it was the scariest thing that I've ever experienced.
20 hours?
My Lord, yes. And we took a taxi. The guy was falling asleep. I'm sorry. I did not pray like I prayed there in a long time. But since Carol asked, yes, that was the thing I remember the most.
Patrick said, "Good evening, Selwyn, to you and your beautiful guests." Good evening, Patrick. Thanks for joining us. Lourdeth, what can you tell us? Tell a young girl who wants to work for the UN and how she can prepare herself.
Well, I would say it depends on what the particular field, but I would say prepare yourself well. Make sure that you're at the top of your game. Make sure that you have internships. I think one of the things that a lot of people from our part of the world don't do is apply for internships, because most, our internships are unpaid internships, but it's usually a foot in the door. And so that's one of the things that the advice I would give, to prepare yourself and to, academically, and make sure that you apply for one of our internships. I think once you get in as an intern and you prove yourself, because I deal with interns all the time, and that's what I tell them. I said, you come in, you make sure you make yourself indispensable. And once a vacancy comes up and you apply, your name
It's already there.
because the UN it's that kind of organization. We recruit who we know. So
What are some of the challenges women and young girls face in developing countries?
I think some of those challenges would be, for example, self-esteem. Because the societies are so patriarchal, I find that the girls do not know their worth, or they're not given any worth. And so through the workshops that we do for them is we try to reestablish it or reframe their thinking and let them know who they are. So that is one thing. And education, lack of education. One of the things what we try not to do is to take away their any kind of cultural frames that they have, except the fact. We try to open up their minds and show them that, you are worth something, and you can go to school, and you can get an education, you can have a career, because these are things they want inside, but a lot of times they can't get past their own minds. And so in some ways we try to speak to them and show them how they can be leaders. And particularly from the Bible, we show them indeed that you can be a leader, because look how many women leaders there were in the Bible. So don't let your religion cloud your thinking, and so.
And on your ad, we have our young women and girls sacred treasure, but we have to tell them that. You really believe that we must find a way to tell them that they are special and they are gifts.
I really do, and I started home. I started home with my two girls, and I tell them how special they are. I tell them how beautiful they are, and I tell them that they can do anything. The world is there, and they can become whatever their desire is to become. I put no limits on them in terms of what they can become. I just nurture, I give direction, and so I know that I'm raising two intelligent, beautiful young women who are going to be a force to reckon with in time to come.
I like that. What is the least helpful advice anyone had given you?
The least helpful advice. I can't think of any right now because I think maybe as soon as I heard it, I threw it out.
You true.
I don't, negative things do not resonate with me and they don't stay with me. I throw it out and I put it away. I get rid of it as soon as it comes. So.
And you talked about self-esteem and education and so on, and I wonder what can our communities do to help foster or build self-esteem in these young women and girls, and encourage them to pursue their education. What from your experiences in India and Cambodia and so on, what do you think is lacking or is missing, or what do you think we can do?
I think reinforcement. I think that, we need to keep hearing it all the time. I think from the time the children are in kindergarten, because there's some environments like in schools where teachers put kids down all the time and tell them they can't do this and they can't do that, and then they may not have the environment at home that affirms what they can become. So I think for those of us who are enlightened, I think wherever we find ourselves with young people, that we should spend the time, take a few minutes, pay attention, and speak life into their lives. Find out from them what it is that you want to become, and you might be surprised what you hear. And tell them and encourage them that yes, you can become this or that, despite your circumstances. And for me, that is the critical thing. Some of us, we forget that we were young once, and forget the stupid things that we, so-called stupid things, or the mistakes or things that we would have done that are unmentionable or undesirable, and so we look down on the young people when they're making their mistakes. But have you taken the time to call them aside and say, get to know them? Get to know them, particularly teenagers. Get to know somebody else's child. Pay attention, pay some interest. Because if we think hard enough, somebody must have paid an interest in us.
That's true. That's very true. Carol asked, what drives you?
My faith and my experiences.
If you hadn't become an editorial research associate at the UN Population Fund, what might you have done?
I think I may have done something to do with people and something to do with people. I think even though I'm now becoming vocal and a bit extroverted. I think I would have, because I love to teach. Maybe I may have become a teacher, or maybe.
I want to ask you a question based on what you just said, that you've become a little bit more extroverted, and only for young people who might be listening, some of them who might be suffering from self-esteem and so on. What do you think, in reflection? It doesn't have to be anything that you don't. If you don't want to share it, it's fine. But what do you think held you back? What do you think are some of the things that might have caused you to be introverted?
tend to like the back seat.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tend to like the back seat. I am good. I'm a very good behind the scenes person. Um, my background is in public relations. Also, I was working as a public relations officer back in Guyana. So I had a little bit of exposure, but I prefer coordinating behind the scenes. I could make anybody look good. I can put you in front, and I will do all the groundwork and do all the coordination. Um, but I felt that there's something inside of me that I need to bring out, and there's something inside of me. There's something in about me that I can give to other people, and I think I started to feel that way because I think the passion, arose in me in terms of, what I started to think, how can I contribute more to my world? It's one of those moments. It's one of those phases, but I don't think it's a phase, but it's a time in my life when I thought, there's much more that I can give than what I'm doing right now, and maybe I need to step out and just do what I need to be doing.
Well, that you said that, we'll take a break right after this question. Um, if you could go back and change something, either in your education or your training, what would you change? And you sort of answered this question before, but I'm asking it anyway. What would you do differently?
For me, I think I would have, perhaps I would have, I think in terms of my education, the only thing I would think of is perhaps I would have done an internship. I think that's the only thing I didn't
Really?
do. Because I felt when I was doing my graduate work, I was already working at the UN.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't feel it was necessary for me to do an internship because I was already there. I was already exposed to the organization. And so I didn't feel that it was necessary. But I think in retrospect, that was my, if you want to call that a mistake, career-wise, because I may have taken a slightly different path in my career.
We are back, and I'll go straight to the chat room. Dawn said, excuse me, I'm hearing some similarities between the needs, wants, and desires of the girls that you work with via the UN in underdeveloped countries and the girls in developed nations. Would you agree?
Yes.
And what are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? The woman that I'm becoming, I would say I'm proud of the woman that I've become. I mean, if I take a look back over my life, and I'm very happy with where I am and where God has placed me at this particular juncture of my life. I'm very satisfied.
So is this your dream profession?
No,
Okay.
it isn't. In terms of my work, the environment is my dream environment.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my passion is being underground with the people. Right now, I'm doing political work in an office. But it helps me to understand, indeed, all the factors and all the players.
Why do you
in
like
this
being
whole thing.
around people? What does that do for you? Being around the people and working with the people.
For me, it's more rewarding to feel the contact, to see the smiles, to see the changes in their outlook, and to see the wow moments when you tell them that indeed there was a woman that was a leader that did this or that, and for some of them, they may not have heard that before. Because you're talking about areas where people have limited education, if any at all.
Can I ask this question then? What is it about your work that feeds your spirit?
The realization how you're impacting someone else's life in a positive way. it's amazing. It's amazing when after the sessions are finished, how when the girls come to you and say, thank you for saying this or that, or they ask you questions and you candidly answer them, and you give them responses that they may not have heard before, you know. It's just enlightening for them, and for me it's rewarding to see how they receive you and how their lives, you know, are changed maybe from with some one word that you may have said to them.
The World Voices Toastmasters Club. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with that?
Well, the World Voices Toastmasters Club was well, it's still in existence. I just don't go to make the time to go to meetings anymore. But it's a club that I helped charter at the United Nations. We wanted the kind of forum. We wanted to have a forum that can develop our speaking skills, and I just connected with one of the South African ambassador. I spoke with him. He was a Toastmaster, and he said, let's join let's just charter a club. And this is as a young person. I had just joined the UN at that time, maybe 4 years, and we chartered the club, and the club is still going on until now.
Again, you know, I love these opportunities when I'm able to ask questions that can benefit young people who are listening, some who might be suffering from shyness or so on. When you had this idea and you were approaching this South African ambassador, did you have reservations? Did you have fears? Did you have doubts? And if you did, how did you overcome those?
Well, I didn't know. I think at the time it just came out of conversation, which is, you know, conversations are good. What you're doing is good.
Thank you.
Conversations. I mean, the thing is speaking with people. We were placed here to engage with each other.
Yes.
And I think when we engage with each other, God knows what can come out of it. Because we were just having a simple conversation. And I was telling him how I felt about speaking in public, how I didn't like to speak in public, and how, you know, I was in graduate school at the time, and I wanted to develop my speaking skills. And he told me about Toastmasters, and he said we could start a club right here.
Wow.
So we went about starting the club. He went to his club that he was going to somewhere uptown, and he got somebody from there to come to sit with me. We talked about how we can start the club, and we started the club.
Would you recommend such a club for most young men and women?
I would. I really would. I mean, these are things that our young people can be doing rather than hanging out in the corner at the corner store. You know, they can be sitting, talking, developing their, you know, it's fun. Toastmasters is fun. And developing, they can have these in the schools, they can have them at church, they can have them in the community centers. Wherever people are gathered, they can have Toastmasters.
If you could go back in time, what would you tell your 16-year-old self?
You better get a grip of yourself.
You think the 16-year-old Lourdeth needed a grip?
Oh yeah, she needed a grip. She was out of control.
What was the best day of your life?
The best day of my life. Oh my gosh, I can't think of that.
Okay. You want to give it some time? Or?
Yeah, let me think about that and come back to you.
Do you have a particular practice to relieve stress?
Yes, I would. For me, prayer helps me a lot. Prayer and meditation helps me to relieve stress. So that's what I do.
You know, going back to beginning of this conversation, you spoke about admirably about your mom and your grandmother, who were very strong women and who have helped to, have raised you into this wonderful woman that is sitting in front of me. Um, and I know that that relationship could not have worked without some obedience on your part. Um, so you listen to them, you respect them, you love them, and you listen to them. Whose voice do you hear in your head when you're about to make a significant decision in your life?
Well, both of them.
Both of them.
Both of them.
The two pillars in your
The
life.
two
Huh?
pillars, yes.
I like that.
Yes.
Let me just go to the chat room. I hope I am going to pronounce this person's name properly. Yetunde A. Udu Besan Omed said, "Great interview. Very refreshing and empowering to hear about a woman who understands her purpose, her leadership journey, and words of wisdom for young people." If I mispronounced, please forgive me. What is next for Lourdeth?
What is next for Lourdeth? I will continue my journey working to advocate for women and girls. I will continue to do that through my family,
Uh-huh.
through my work at the UN, through my work with the church and with the community. Um, for me, balancing that with raising my girls and making sure that they get into college in a few years.
Uh-huh.
And I think for me, once the girls are settled in college, I think that will be the next phase for me in terms of all this that I'm doing.
What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
I don't even see myself doing anything other than what I'm doing in terms of generally speaking.
Uh-huh.
Right now, as you know, I'm working as an editorial associate. I'm working
Right.
with documents. I'm working with the executive board. Um, so within the international sphere,
Uh-huh.
I will still be there. I think come in the next 5, 10 years.
Okay, wonderful.
So that will not change, but maybe the specific role will change.
Finish this sentence. On Sunday evenings, I look forward to.
Relaxing in my bed, watching 60 Minutes or reading a good book.
And I have one to write on top of that. What do you do on your days off?
On my days off,
Uh-huh.
I go to the spa.
Is that so?
Yes. That's my thing.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Highly recommended.
Highly recommended.
I see. This is a little strange, but I'm curious, so I'm going to ask this question. If you were writing your epitaph, what would you say?
I told you I'm no good talking about myself.
Okay, that's what you would say? That's a good answer. I told you I'm not good. That's very good, actually. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, I would like to perhaps just make a final plug for women and girls.
Go ahead.
I would like to re-emphasize the need for society to pay attention to these precious gems that we have. Because if we look at it, these women, these young girls particularly, grow up to be women. And, we want to make sure that we have strong women. These women will be mothers. And if they're strong women, if they're women who believe in their purpose, who find their purpose, who believe in themselves, then we have a chance to develop the entire society, because when they have sons, they will make sure that their sons also are strong young men and who they place emphasis on the way they ought to behave. So some of the things that the ills that we have in society will, automatically be reduced if we have proper mothers and young women in society.
I know we started the show with a sort of tribute to Nelson Mandela, and I asked you if you had a question for him, if you could have asked him a question, and your answer, I believe, was teach us about forgiveness, and that's a powerful, powerful answer. I want to close with another question. When you think of Nelson Mandela, what comes to mind?
This great person who went through so much, but yet, his life was not easy. His life was not easy, but yet, what a legacy he leaves for us, he has left for us. And if each of us can just take one little part of his life, something that he showed us how to do, this world indeed would be a much better place.
I love that, Lourdeth. I'm so glad I asked you this question. And last, or finally, a question I ask every guest: what makes you laugh out loud?
It doesn't take much. I love a good joke, and I laugh really, really loudly. My children can tell you that.
Is that so?
Yes, I love a good joke, and anything, and I would laugh at any and everything.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being so candid. In the chat room, Dawn said, thank you for a good interview. You're welcome, Dawn. And I'm so glad that you made the time to come in this weather. Thanks.
Thank you for having me, Selwyn. It really was a pleasure having conversation with you this evening.
You're welcome. I see in the chat room, Wayne said, great interview. So you're getting all the compliments, and I'm so glad. Lourdeth, thanks. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
You heard me. I said Arrowhead. I love my golden arrowhead. Mama, mama, mama.